Hey everybody, happy Sunday or whatever day it is. Maybe you're somewhere halfway across the world and it's not Sunday, but whatever day it is, I hope you're having a good day. I have a lot to talk about. We're going to watch a video that's going to totally creep you out, probably, maybe, I don't know. It resurfaced recently and you may have seen it already, but I had a few people send it to me. So we're going to watch. It's from Deadspin and it basically is a bunch of news anchors saying the same thing. Do you guys know what video I'm talking about? Where it's like, this is a threat to our democracy. It says that at the end. So it actually turns out that video, even though it's kind of making the rounds again right now, was made back in 2018. And we're going to talk all about what was behind that video and what it reveals about local news and bias and all the things that we come to this channel for, right, guys? So let's see who's in Canada, Brooksville, Florida. I think I saw Hawaii at the beginning. Yes, I recently saw that Sinclair video again and naturally saw it in a whole new light. You know what? It's actually interesting because that Sinclair video was originally made to actually kind of criticize conservative bias, and it's now conservatives who often are sharing this video. So it's just interesting how things have changed on really, you know, how people see big tech differently, censorship differently, and how this is really an important part, I think, of being a media consumer is having historical knowledge about this stuff. And I think perhaps that's one of the biggest problems nowadays as you see media in the place that it's in is that we oftentimes like forget to tell people that, hey, 4 years ago, the same thing happened, for instance. So we'll talk all about that. I'm just going to let some people get in here. And Alabama, Southwest Washington, BC, Linden, Washington, Ottawa, nice, North Georgia, Los Angeles, hello, Texas. We have friends in Texas who really want us to move there, but I don't know, guys. It doesn't have enough mountains for me. Yes, the pendulum does indeed swing and will sometimes bonk you on the back of your head. And you know what's funny, y'all? I think that really it comes down to oftentimes we don't see that what we're dealing with today is reaction or it's sort of a referent or a reaction to what has already occurred. And so I would hope that, I guess, at some point, journalists would, and there are, of course, I've talked about journalists I think are still doing a really great job out there. And I hate sort of using that blanket term, the media, oftentimes, because it sort of is overgeneralized, but it's hard to talk about it in a quick, succinct way without saying that. But with that said, I do think that there's a place for a little bit of humility to just say, hey, not only let's tell you like what we were talking about 4 years ago is this really, for instance, an egregious danger that's never happened before, whatever the topic is, or have we seen this before and we've survived? My husband just gave me a super chat. Thank you, Lynn, from the other room. So yes, we're going to talk about this video because a lot of times I get questions from people about what are really the most serious issues facing mainstream news, local news, cable, national news, whatever it is. And it's often talked about, I think, in sort of a, I don't want to call it conspiratorial because I think there are some real serious concerns, very serious concerns. But I also think there's some parts of it that nobody talks about that I find to be actually more egregious, or at least as egregious as some of the sort of like, you know, corporate, overt bias. Stuff like journalists just not having enough time to do their jobs, for instance. Journalists having to boil a story down to 90 seconds when it really deserves, you know, maybe 30 minutes, all that stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to show this video real fast because I think you guys are going to find it interesting. Let me know what you think about it in the comment section, and then we're going to go over it. Again, this video is from Deadspin, okay? It was created in 2018. It's making the rounds again. And it is a compilation, basically, of anchors who work for Sinclair, which is the largest local TV news ownership company in the country. And it was a promo that was basically written by the corporation to call out what the news group was saying was fake news and how they were differentiating themselves from that. And we'll talk about the criticism of this promo. We'll talk about what some of the employees of Sinclair said about it. But it was Sinclair's, I guess, effort at the time, and they've been criticized for this, it was their effort at the time to sort of say, hey, we know nobody trusts the media. And this was, of course, this was a couple years into the Trump administration. We know, people are talking about not trusting. I shouldn't say everybody, nobody trusts them, but a lot of, it was very, it was sort of like ramping up, the fake news, President Trump tweeting fake news, that kind of stuff. That idea was sort of becoming more and more public. I will question the fact whether people really just started to distrust mainstream media under Trump. I actually think it's very clear if you look at Pew's research, for instance, that started long ago, but it may have been more vocalized as of late. That said, this was their effort to sort of say, okay, we hear you. We hear this sort of fake news concern. So we're going to put out this promo to say we think that fake news is a threat to the democracy and we are different. We, Sinclair, are going to do it differently. Before we get to the video, let me just do a couple quick super chats. Josh, thank you, from California. We got Deplorabology, address the totalitarian Great Reset and Klaus Schwab, the fascist technocrat billionaire behind it. I honestly do not know enough about all of that stuff, but if you guys want to leave some comments in the comment section about it, we can all look at everybody's thoughts on it. Let me show you this video, though, real fast, okay? So again, this was put together by Deadspin. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about troubling trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false news
has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
All right. So sorry that went back to my original screen. Basically, if you paid attention to that video, you saw that it was a threat to our democracy, apparently, according to Sinclair. But the criticism of that video, basically, first off, was Sinclair had one of Trump's strategic advisors, former strategic advisor, as a political commentary advisor, I guess, for them. And so there was a lot of focus on them for that. And then they had this video in addition, so it got a lot of criticism. So I'm going to show you real fast. Let's look at the web here, and we are going to talk about this article. We're journalists at a Sinclair news station. We're pissed. This is from Vox. And it's by Anonymous, because they said that they couldn't talk about it publicly or else they'd lose their jobs. Now, I did work in a market, Seattle, where Sinclair owned a station. So I'm familiar with the reporters. I remember them talking about this. So it starts off like this. We knew this was coming when Sinclair announced that all stations in the company's network, including ours, would be required to roll out a, quote, journalistic responsibility promo. The mood at our station darkened. Our anchors were told in an email that the script they would read was a straightforward public service announcement about the dangers of biased news stories. But after we actually laid eyes on the script, many of us felt uncomfortable. Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think, the anchors recited. This is extremely dangerous to a democracy. It goes on to say, we hated the way the PSA bashed the other news outlets and the way it insinuated that we were the only truthful news source, despite the rightward tilt our network has taken over the years. Our anchors privately said they felt like corporate mouthpieces, especially when they found out no edits of the script were permitted. Yet bosses made it clear that reading the message wasn't a suggestion, but an order from above. It seemed like everyone knew all of this was a bad idea. We expected fallout, but we didn't know how viral the promo would get until Friday, when an edited Deadspin video featuring the robotic voices of Sinclair anchors reciting the same script word for word exploded on our Twitter feeds. Our station's Facebook page was inundated with angry messages denouncing our journalism, our station, and our employees. We are journalists at one of the 193 local television stations owned by Sinclair Broadcast Group, a media corporation with conservative and pro-Trump ties. We are writing this essay because we're disturbed by the editorial direction our leadership has taken, and we want people to know that many of us at Sinclair reject what our company is doing. We're writing this anonymously because if we spoke out under our names, we could lose our jobs and potentially owe money to Sinclair. So we are going to break down a little bit of what these folks said. Again, it's anonymous, so we're going to just take Vox's word for it. Though I have seen this letter on other websites, so we'll just say that it's legit and that there were employees at Sinclair that actually did participate in writing this. I got a lot to say specifically about that promo and, you know, Sinclair and whether it deserved, I guess, the level of alarm that a lot of journalists gave it when, you know, one of the things I guess that I find to be somewhat bothersome and far more concerning, I guess, is that you see people, for instance, who were part of illegal government programs that have been found to be illegal, like the NSA spying program. They are like pundits now. They comment on stories and they're looked at as experts by these mainstream outlets, and there doesn't seem to be hardly any alarm over that. To me, that would be like more concerning than a commercial that Sinclair is running would be like having somebody who was participating in an illegal program with the U.S. government as sort of just a commentator on your news station. But I don't know, that's just me. I like to hear what you guys have to say. Let me get to a quick super chat. Keep up the good work. Hope this helps purchase updated tech and equipment. Thank you. Yeah, actually, one of the things, I hope you guys notice I have a new microphone, but one of the things I'm planning to do next is put up some sound panels, so hopefully it will be less echoey. But anyway, let's see. We're going to get to another video that we're going to talk about, and this is PBS. They talked about this Deadspin video and about Sinclair. So let me play you the anchor's intro for PBS NewsHour about this video, because it kind of reveals sort of how a lot of mainstream outlets sort of would consider that video and their concern, for instance, about Sinclair and I guess alleged right-wing bias. So let's look at that real fast. Here we go.
Does it matter who owns your local TV station? While polls show Americans are increasingly worried about so-called fake news, they also show that many trust their local news more than other sources. The largest owner of local stations in the country is Sinclair Broadcasting. A viral video of Sinclair news anchors has again raised concerns about the way in which the company mixes news with partisan political opinion.
All right, so what do you guys think about that? I was hearing from her, if I heard it correctly, that there's concern about their partisan political affiliation. Now, I think when it comes to mainstream media these days, obviously, if you take a look at what research groups like Pew, for instance, have put out about where we're at now with public trust of mainstream news, it does appear, for instance, that conservative distrust has increased while Democrat distrust has decreased, and that likely is because it's kind of like my enemy's enemy is my friend, that actually it used to be kind of a bipartisan complaint, but under Trump, a lot of things have changed with the way people view reality. And so there has been an increase in growth of trust among Democrats because it's like, well, he doesn't, Trump, the guy we don't like, doesn't like the news. So now we like the news because, again, enemy's enemy is my friend. And then conservatives have grown even more distrustful of the news because of their handling of President Trump. And we have seen the news, like, the New York Times was very open with the fact that they felt like President Trump was and has been a greater threat, so they had to handle him differently than past presidents. And so if you were like, well, it seems like under Trump things have changed, it's true. I mean, even the New York Times basically was out there saying, like, this is really kind of putting us in a tough spot as journalists because we're trying to be objective, but this guy is just testing our norms of objectivity. I actually think that's exactly how they put it. He's testing our norms of objectivity. if you look at the Pew Research data right now, you'll see that they also have found that the mainstream media outlets, newspaper, TV, whatever, have also grown to be far more partisan in their audiences. For instance, like I believe, I'll have to go back to the research, and it's like 90% of the readers of the New York Times, or 80%, I mean, it's really high, of viewers or readers of the New York Times consider themselves to lean left politically. And then you would find something similar on the opposite with Fox News Channel. And so more and more, it's becoming like, if you go to a certain outlet, it's highly likely that you are part of one political affiliation, and that that outlet is potentially, I'm not going to call out everyone and say they definitely are, but giving you what you want to hear. That's kind of like, we're at a place with journalism now where it's become a business, where are we telling you what's true, or are we telling you what we feel like you want to hear because we don't want to lose our audience base because we're a business? And these are all questions that I think people are asking right now, and valid questions that people are asking about the news media. And so it's funny, I don't know why this video is making the rounds again, but I always thought it was kind of interesting to see the alarm over Sinclair, when I feel like there was opportunity, I guess, for, I don't want to call it alarm, but there's opportunity for criticism in a lot of different ways prior to Sinclair, for, if not just as potentially valid for, valid reasons for criticism as that, or even more. Like I said, if you have outlets who are claiming to be objective, and then like they're bringing on analysts who have been part of programs that have been found to be unconstitutional or whatever, and they're just like looked at as experts. I think that these are valid opportunities for alarm, but you don't necessarily see that make it into the headline. So Jacob asks, can you briefly discuss Kayleigh McEnany addressing the media as activists? It seems fitting to me. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I just said, the New York Times years ago, I've done videos about this where I've shown their headlines regarding how they felt like they needed to cover Trump differently. They're not even secretive about it. So it's very obvious that, like, you don't have to dig too far to see that there's kind of there's a dual mindset. Like, not everybody I would say, there are still journalists out there that see this actually as far more dangerous than it is helpful to kind of go after Trump as if he's this brand new danger to democracy. I was just reading actually an article that Glenn Greenwald wrote on his new Substack account, now that he's left The Intercept, talking about like the way that you see Trump, whether you see him as kind of a symptom or as a natural sort of outgrowth of where we've come in the last decade or so in the United States, if you see him as just a continuation, I guess, of the spectrum of the United States policy and leadership, or do you see him as this completely different, out of the universe of normalcy guy? And so depending on how you see him, you're going to cover him differently. Again, like I said, there was that article in the New York Times that said that he's testing the realms of objectivity. You see people like Jim Acosta who, have made a significant amount of money off of the fighting, that he does on Twitter with President Trump and all that stuff. And so I do think there's not even really a question that it's been covered differently. This administration has been covered differently. And so for her to call them activists, I mean, like I said, I don't use a blanket term to describe anybody. And there are some really good journalists out there who are covering the administration very well. On the other hand, yeah, there are journalists out there who like really believe that they have to take this much more seriously than they ever took another presidency. And I think that has led to valid distrust, increased distrust, because there are presidents in the past who have done some pretty bad things that didn't necessarily make it into the public eye. And so you do have to ask yourself, why? Okay, Ryan Holiday in his recent book, Trust Me, I'm Lying, discusses how the media can is manipulated by someone who has done it. Okay, so let me get to that, because I do want to talk about some of the stuff that is sort of macro versus the micro issues that journalists are dealing with. And so let me play you this last video clip, and then we're going to get into that, and I'm going to answer your question, okay? So here we go.
Scott Livingston, Sinclair's senior vice president of news, responded in a memo saying, "The promos served no political agenda and represented nothing more than an effort to differentiate our award-winning news programming from other, less reliable sources of information."
Okay, so again, like I said, you have Sinclair saying, hey, we're not trying to be politically biased, we're just trying to differentiate ourselves. And I think it's interesting because they're saying like, hey, we know you don't trust anybody else, but trust us. Now, in doing so, I think they did actually create more distrust. I think there were a lot of people who were like, what's going on? Because it created this controversy and put them in the public eye in a way that they probably would not have been. And I do want to say that I think there is a lot of that happening right now. Like, don't trust them, trust us, don't trust them, trust us. You know, I've even had people say to me like, well, you're telling people don't trust them, trust me. Actually, what I'm trying to say is like, let me give you my experience of what I've seen happen. And then, you know, take the information as you will. If it's helpful to you, take it. If not, leave it. And understand that I, Allison Morrow, come from my own place of bias, really. I mean, I grew up in a certain town. I went to a certain number of schools. I had parents who were doctors. I have a degree from theological university, you know, Boston University School of Theology. So I have a background in psychology and counseling along with theology. So that informs the way I see people and how I relate to them as a journalist. You know, all kinds of things. So we all have these particular places. And I think, you know, what I look for more and more is people saying like, all right, I'm just going to try to understand the world as best I can. I'm going to call it as I see it. I'm going to try to be brave and courageous and not just afraid of people leaving a mean comment or withdrawing support. I'm going to be honest and genuine and not try to pretend like I am the only one out there that has any good ideas and everybody else is, you know, trying to pull one over on you. I just want to give you some information that hopefully as you're starting to read and consume media, it might help you become maybe a better consumer. But at the end of the day, you got to do the thinking for yourself. I'm not here to tell you that like you should just parrot whatever I say. So all right, let's go back to that question as far as the manipulation side of things. Now, this is what I wanted to really get across, like with the Sinclair video, okay? There was a lot of criticism, right? That you had the corporation that was saying, okay, everybody has to read this. All the anchors have to read this promo. We're going to put it out there and it's going to differentiate us from other news stations and it's going to help people see that we're not fake news, but they are. Here's the problem, like everybody's saying you're forcing them to read this thing that feels like propaganda. If you're watching your local news station and you feel like they're starting to say the same thing as what you saw on the network or the cable news or the wires, you're right, because every day there are things that filter down from the national level or the corporation to the local news stations. And so I think it's kind of silly, I guess, to like call out one promo, for instance, versus the days and days of regular content that is just repeated from the wires, from the networks. I mean, it's very common practice to have like if you're an NBC affiliate and you have the networks writing national copy, that you just copy and paste it into the prompter. I mean, you may change a couple words for it to be more like, you know, flavor of your station, but it's not like you're completely changing the content. In fact, a lot of times people don't have the time to do that. Producers are really overworked, which is a totally separate but very important issue to talk about with modern day journalism. But they're still copying and pasting the sort of, you know, national news copy. And so they're repeating it. And so how that's so much different. I mean, maybe somebody could push back on me on that, but I'm not totally sure I understand, like, if Sinclair is making its anchors read this thing. I mean, I guess they're saying, well, it made us look like we didn't like other news organizations and we don't want to call out other news organizations. And that just makes us feel like, you know, we just feel guilty about that. Okay, I guess I can see that. But as far as it being like, you know, it's propaganda, I think that people like, maybe it's because of the conservative bias. I'm not totally sure why this was so alarmist, because like I said, there is copy that comes down from the top to the bottom every day. And like I said, if you're looking at national news, especially in your local news market, they're not in Washington, D.C. They're not in New York City. They're not in these places. And so they're not doing the original reporting. It's coming from somewhere. And so a lot of times wire services are what people fall back on for that. And if there's going to be a problem in the wire copy or there's bias in the wire copy, you're going to see it in your local news because they're repeating it. Thank you, TJF Denver, $4.99 super chat. I appreciate it. Let's see. Ari Sinclair, it seems to me that a lot of controversy could have been avoided by simply having the local announcers and newscasters simply announce that what followed was a statement by Sinclair. Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. If they had just kind of been honest about, hey, we're putting this out there as a Sinclair group and we want you to know this but I don't know if the corporation would have allowed them to say, hey, this came from corporate, like, don't blame us. But I do think the point you're making is valid, and that is just being a little bit more open and a little bit more obvious, I guess, and just genuine about who you are and where you're coming from and all that stuff. That goes a long way with people, because I think nowadays we're past this idea that you can just have some totally objective, like in a vacuum, blank slate kind of journalist who has just never had any sort of subjective thoughts with their journalism. I think we're past that point. So it's like, here's my background, here's how I think through things. Let me try to show you both sides, maybe give you some thoughts of my own, and then just be honest about it. I think that does go a long way. Let's see here. Humble student, if you have watched Tucker Carlson and other programs, we see the cable media parroting the same identical talking points every day. Can you address this issue? I appreciate what you are doing. Yeah, it's funny. Like, if you watch it, that's 24-hour news. If you watch the 24-hour news stations, yeah, they do a lot of the same stuff every hour. To me, it's like you go to the air. That's when I see it when I'm at the airport, because I don't watch it that often, on constant repeat in my living room, because I prefer being sane most of the time. And I have a 6-month-old to drive me insane if that's what I really want. But when I do watch it in the airport, for instance, it's like the same thing. And there's gazillions of other things that are happening somewhere else in the world that are really important that are not getting any attention. And I do think this happened with a 24-hour news cycle. But also, you're like, well, there's 24 hours now. You could do some really great journalism with 24 hours, right? The problem is, like, you don't have the staffing necessarily to put together, like, these great investigative journalism pieces. There's also the problem, too, of people and their attention spans. And do they want to see an 8-minute long investigative piece if, they can just watch talking heads scream at each other? We're kind of getting used to that. And people, I think, sometimes might find the old way 10 years ago boring. Like, would you want to watch something that's intelligent and intellectual? And people say they want things a lot. And I sometimes question if they really do want that anymore, because I've seen, like, even on my own channel, if I go one way or another, that's like, oh, well, wait, on this one video, you said this, and that was like, that would have seemed like a conservative talking point. And then on this video, you said that, and that sounds like a liberal talking point. And what's going on here? Because I'm just trying to tell you what I see as I see it. So sometimes maybe that coincides with what people on the right would think, and maybe sometimes what people on the left would think. And, and you see people just like, oh, see, you're biased, and they freak out. And so it makes me wonder, like, did people want me to tell you what I saw and call a spade, or did you want to just hear what you wanted to hear? And so, I do question sometimes if people really want what they say they want. But when it comes to the cable news and just like the sort of regurgitating, as somebody who has worked in that world, yeah, there were just like a regular pocket of commentators that we would call on, people that we knew could come in on a minute's notice, that we would book and send a car to go get them. And often, we drove the news. It's like, well, this is trending. Well, we made it trend. It's like, we're driving the news cycle. So you can't just say, like, we're just putting interesting stuff on. Like, we're deciding what is interesting to people. But they often followed the same talking points, in part because, like I said, you had this setup for the 24-hour news cycle where you have like, listen, I was 21 years old when I was working at cable news. Like, I had just gotten out of college. I barely knew what I was talking about. I barely knew how to, like, drive a car at that point, frankly. And so much less put together political segments. But, we did it, and we just booked the guests and we kind of let them say what they wanted to say. And we had a certain amount of wiggle room within the, like, these are the topics we're doing today. But there was kind of a boundary of what we worked within, you know, and what topics we were going to do. And that was often determined by those higher than the producers. I was a booking producer. I had an executive producer. The executive producer had people above them. And then, of course, like I worked for Fox News Channel. So there was Roger Ailes, there was Rupert Murdoch, there were all those people. I never knew what was going on that level. Though I will tell you a very funny story. When I worked there, I booked a segment for Outback Jack. I don't know if you guys remember that show. He was the Bachelor of Australia, basically. And so he would go on these like Outback dating scenarios with women. Like, I barely remember the show, but I think it's the thing like you like eat raw animals or something like that. It was just like supposed to be sort of a play on America's Bachelor, but in the Outback with this Outback Jack guy. And I remember booking a segment for him, and I had to get him a conference room on the second floor or the 8th floor, whichever one was, I believe it was Rupert Murdoch's floor. But anyway, I accidentally booked his personal conference room for Outback Jack. So all these Fox News Channel, like, you know, executives come into the room and see this guy with like shark teeth on his hat, his leather hat, with his like feet up on the table, doing a radio interview that I had booked. And we're like, who the heck gave this guy this conference room? And it came all the way down to me the next day. I walked into work and I got in serious trouble. But I just did what I was told to do. I just booked the conference room like I was told to do it. I did not know that I was going to be putting Outback Jack in. I can't remember if it was Rupert Murdoch or Roger Ailes' conference room, but that's one of my favorite stories. Okay, let's see. I'm going to get to some super chats. You're awakening slowly from Lavender Family Farms. I don't know if you grow lavender or if that's just your last name, but I do love lavender. Let's see here. Going down. Tell them about how you used to dislike watching Tucker Carlson. I did I disagree with, there are certain things Tucker says that I totally disagree with, and certain things that I'm like, wow, I like that Tucker goes against the grain when it comes to war. I've really appreciated hearing a different voice about removing the troops from Afghanistan, for instance. You see him have people on that I watch on YouTube, for instance, like Jimmy Dore. He has Glenn Greenwald on talking about censorship. And so I don't remember what it was, but a few years ago, I was like, wait a second. Did I just actually like something I saw on Tucker's show? Because for a long time, I really like I don't know if it was just his delivery, because he was just like very, he can be very aggressive sometimes. But I actually have found myself more and more to be like, what's going on Tucker's show? He's like allowed to question the establishment when it comes to war, for instance. Okay, humble student. What I am describing is multiple network journalists on differing networks, all using the same identical words that are also being used by the punditry, CBS. Okay, I see what you're saying. I honestly, I don't think that I don't think there's like a collusion in the sense of like they're all meeting in some secret society or something like that. I think they all hang out together. They watch each other. Listen, when I was at an NBC, a local NBC station, MSNBC was on the TV all day long. Like I would watch Rachel Maddow all day long. I didn't have a choice. It was just on. It was part because we were an NBC station. So that's what we would watch. And I just think people just watch. It's just constantly like you're consuming this, and the words just start to become a part of your brain, and the ideas kind of start to become a part of how you think about things. And if you're not regularly talking with people who are different than you are, you're not regularly consuming material that's outside of that category that you're working in, then it's like a language, y'all. It's you hang out with people that talk a certain way and you start to talk like them. And that to me, like, that's what I kind of wanted to go back to with the Sinclair video, is that oftentimes like there are these ideas that are brought to me about the sort of grave evils of sort of corporatist media, from the sense of like there's a Wizard of Oz behind every screen that's purposely trying to brainwash you. And granted, I'm not going to argue that there aren't some seriously nefarious sides of the corporate news setup at this point. That said, there are a lot of daily problems that journalists are dealing with, the best intentioned journalists that are dealing with, that have more to do with, like, again, just going out and drinking with each other and not knowing anybody who's different, not having time to get your work done every day, not having time to put the story together in the complexity that it deserves. So like having to compress something that should get 5 minutes down to 90 seconds. Hey, if I have a deadline that's at 4 o'clock and I get my assignment at 10 a.m. and I have to have somebody ready to go for an interview by like 12:31, or else I'm not going to get that on television, whoever calls me back by 12:30 is going to be the person that goes on television. It's not because I like them better or I have a certain political affiliation with them or whatever. It's because literally they were the ones that called me back and they're the ones that are going to get to go on TV because I have to fill the space. There were plenty of times where I remember once specifically, I'll actually tell you 2 stories. I think I've talked about one of them in the past. One time I was talking to my managing editor about the fact that there was like, this person said this and this person said that. He read my script and he was like, okay, I see that this person says this and this person says that. What's the truth? And I was like, I don't know. I honest to God, I don't know because I haven't had time to do the research. You guys want this on by 4 o'clock. What do you want me to do? And there are a lot of journalists that are in that position where they're very frustrated that they don't have the time to do the job that they signed up to do. And most of them behind the scenes will complain about this, but they don't like talking about it in public, I guess, because I'm not sure. They don't want to inspire more distrust. I'm not totally sure, but there are plenty of things that journalists themselves who will publicly defend the profession will complain about behind closed doors with one another. And the time, for instance, and is, hiring younger people, for instance, who don't like hiring people who are straight out of J school, and that's the other thing too. They all go to the same schools, right? I didn't go to journalism school. I have really different degrees, actually. I have studied history and French. I lived in Paris. I have a divinity degree with a specialization in psychology and counseling. I grew up riding horses with people out in the country. I had a different, I guess, track to getting to where I am. And so I've appreciated having those differences. But one thing that I was thinking about doing a totally separate video on, which I think is really interesting, is like the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And there was a lot of uproar about Trump not wanting to go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I was sitting here thinking, like, why do we have the White House Correspondents' Dinner? Like, why do we have the media and the government going out and eating these expensive dinners and drinks with each other? I was like scratching my head over this. Like, why do we have this? Like, why are these people going out with each other? This doesn't make any sense to me. And like having these expensive dinners. And so it's like, that actually to me is more concerning, is sort of all in the same class, all coming from the same background, all going to the same schools, all having the same talking points. And so when we're discussing, like, you're seeing kind of the similar things, you're seeing similar ideology, I think, in part because it's just, they're all part of the same groups. They consume the same material. They're reading, they see one organization as more trustworthy. Like, say they read the New York Times all the time, they start talking like the New York Times. They start thinking like the New York Times, and anything that's sort of outside that world is seen as suspect. And then in today's modern world of social media shaming, you then as a journalist are afraid that if you question something that has powerful activism behind it, you could potentially lose your job. And I was just talking to my husband about this the other day, like, at some point, are we just not going to be able to fire everybody so you won't have to worry about that mob anymore? I mean, at some point, you can't fire everyone, right? So I feel like, is there going to be a reset on that button too? Like, are we going to eventually get to the point where we can start asking tough questions again as journalists of movements, for instance, that, deserve to have fair criticism, just to ask the questions and to voice criticism from people without trying to silence it and censor it, and just be open and talk about that kind of stuff, because we're not afraid of getting fired because everybody's already been fired. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of one thing I wonder about. Okay, humble student again. The accusation been made that Talking Point are distributed by K Street and delivered to folks each day. I don't know if this is true, which is why I'm asking you to weigh in. Thanks. I don't know what that is, so I will look it up, and if I find, I could do a video about it. But I'm not familiar with K Street. We didn't have Talking Points whether I was at Fox or when I was working in local news. We didn't, as far as I knew, and again, what do I know? I was a segment producer. I was 21, 22 years old, but we didn't like have, some truck come with like big pamphlets of papers and talking points and whatnot. It was just more so that people thought very similarly to one another. There was a sort of agreed upon theme. And then also besides that, like even when you're in local news, you tend to have similar conversations day in and day out. And now this varies, I think. I will say it varies depending on the market, because if you're in Kentucky doing local news versus Seattle, where I just finished up, the representation, I think, is going to be a little bit different than, from market to market. Like in Kentucky, if you're a conservative in the newsroom, you probably are more likely to speak up than if you're a conservative in a newsroom in Seattle, because the peer pressure exists within and without of the newsroom. And so I did know there was sort of like this quiet subculture of people in Seattle that had ideas that would have been considered kind of anathema to sort of the general liberal Seattle mindset. And so those people in the newsroom wouldn't speak up. But I've worked in newsrooms like in Tennessee, for instance, where I think people felt more free to do so, mostly because I think the public was more open to those ideas, and maybe they would have been less open to left-leaning ideas, and sort of somebody, in that world would have felt less comfortable. I don't know. I will say, I started out in Georgia, and then I moved to Knoxville in 2008, and that was, when President Obama was elected. And, I think slowly, like if there are a lot of things we could go back and look at the Obama administration and how that was covered. I think it'll be interesting to see, what happens with Biden and the media and all of that stuff, because it changes. And I think Trump has really changed a lot. And I don't know if we go back to the old way of doing things or not. I don't know how media goes after Trump, because in a lot of ways, I feel like there has been, he has dictated a lot of the news cycle. And so can they survive without a Trump presidency? It'll be really interesting. I'll just say that it'll be interesting to see what we're talking about, in a post-Trump news era. Let's see here. So, okay. One last quick thing that I wanted to talk about is tech and Biden, because here we go. We have seen that, let me hit my web button here. We have seen that there are articles like this this is from the New York Post. Joe Biden taps tech executives for White House transition team. And I do a lot of tech videos on this channel talking about Section 230 or censorship, community guideline rules, like on YouTube, for instance. And so I'll read you a little bit of this. President-elect Joe Biden has tapped at least a dozen staffers at major tech companies to help with his transition into the White House. The techies, many of whom previously worked in the Obama administration, are among dozens of people on Biden's so-called agency review teams tasked with taking stock of the government's operations before he takes office. The appointments mean Silicon Valley veterans will have a hand in shaping the Biden administration's approach to a wide range of federal functions, from developing trade policy to supporting small businesses. That could continue once the transition is complete. And then goes on to talk a little bit about how actually there are spots for some big tech critics, public interest, watchdog group, Gene Kimmelman, he's in it, Sarah Miller of the American Economic Liberties Project. Those have pushed for antitrust scrutiny of tech giants' practices. Now, it's interesting when you talk about critics of big tech. I think a lot of people are critics of big tech, but they fall on one of two sides of solutions. One is that you should rein them in and there should be more government control over them. The other is less censorship, that there should be, because some people think that big tech is like this Wild West that is allowing way too much misinformation out there and it's affecting our daily lives, and we need somebody to come in and comb it. We need the tech companies to crack down on misinformation, on fake news, and that maybe the government should come in and hold them accountable if they don't do that. Then there are those of us like myself who say that is kind of scary, and I don't want the government to come in and crack down on big tech when it comes to, or have big tech crack down on users like myself, because I'm concerned that you're just going, well, in one case, if all of a sudden you have the tech companies more and more, they could be sued, for instance, for what they allow on their platforms. If Section 230 is taken away, then people like myself may not have the opportunity to put stuff out there anymore, because then it could end up becoming even worse as far as censorship, I should say. That's the argument. And I do get, like, I mean, I've done many videos about big tech censorship and cracking down on misinformation. And I just did a video about Phil DeFranco talking about, you know, misinformation in the election and saying that YouTube's failing you by not cracking down on it. And I've said repeatedly that, you know, it's like one man's trash is another man's treasure. One person's misinformation is another person's like valid opinion on a subject, and the censorship wheel will eventually come back and point at you. And so if you're calling for censorship of somebody you don't like, it's just a matter of time before it comes back to you. I mean, it's just whoever's in power is the person who censors, right? And that changes. Like, it was Obama, then it was Trump, you know? So it's like, who, you know, say you were like part of the Obama administration and you didn't want censorship of yourself, but now you're saying like you want Trump censored, or vice versa. Like, it just goes back and switches. Whoever's in power, censorship protects the establishment. And the establishment ideology. And so if you're somebody who's calling for censorship, to me, it's crazy talk, because it's like, it's only a matter of time before it comes back and points at you. And then also, it just doesn't give us the opportunity to ask tough questions of the establishment, because tough questions of the establishment are often labeled, you know, conspiracy theories or misinformation or that kind of thing. And granted, yeah, there are some dangers. Like, there are short-term risks, right? There are short-term risks in the fact that there could be stuff that gets out there and people act poorly upon. However, to me, the far graver danger is having, you know, a corporate elites or the government coming in and saying, like, we're gonna tell you what is acceptable speech, and we're gonna tell you what you can or cannot do on the platform. All right, so let me get to a couple more of your questions here. Let's see. Okay, if you guys email and stuff, like, my email is on the description of my channel, so you can send me an email, because Bob says email me, I'd like to share a link. You can send me an email. I created my own Substack to get into the habit of writing on various things. Is there any video book or advice you would recommend, Joseph? Well, honestly, I'm reading Manufacturing Consent right now, which I think is really interesting. Noam Chomsky and somebody else, I can't remember who the other author was, just about how we got to where we are with media. I think, like, what I have learned the most from, if I'm going into a media venture, like say you're going to go onto Substack, or when I went onto YouTube, was just regularly reading content that's out there and seeing how the platform works and understanding that. And so it really is kind of a matter of, like, you're somebody who's going out there and you want to start getting, like, your thoughts out there on a particular platform. In today's world, it's really like learning a new language. So when I lived in Paris, I learned French, obviously. I'm in America now, so I'm speaking English on YouTube, and so it's like, depending on whatever the platform is, they have kind of their own language in the sense of like how the platform works and all that stuff. So that's what I would recommend doing, is look at how the platform works and how to get the word out there. If you're on Substack, I mean, for instance, I subscribed to Glenn Greenwald when he left The Intercept on Substack. I really like reading his stuff on there. Matt Taibbi, I think, is on there too. He's another person that I follow. I think just like consuming that material helps. And it also helps, like, if you're on YouTube and you want to better understand whether you're a creator or you're just a consumer, you know, the regular sort of picking people who are different ideologically and have different ways of thinking of things is important. And I think it's kind of, you know, it's interesting. I've lost seriously hundreds of subscribers since the election, which I can't totally figure out. Like, is it videos that I've done? Is something going on with YouTube? Like, I don't know. What I hope it isn't is that, you know, you have some different ideas that come out and then it's like one video and people just unsubscribe because they don't want to hear another idea. I subscribe to so many different YouTube channels of so many different political ideologies. I actually, not only do I enjoy it, it makes me so much more calm, because if you listen to just one sort of echo chamber enough, you will have higher blood pressure. I can guarantee you, because it's fascinating when I watch my feed, you know, like the videos oftentimes drop like 10 a.m., noon, whatever. and I'll see the same kind of thing that people criticize mainstream media for. Like, I'll see the same topic covered by different YouTubers of different political affiliation. And it's crazy. Like, it'll be like, this is the worst thing ever. And then it'll be the same thing right on. This is the best thing ever. And you're like, wow, okay, well, is it the best or the worst thing? And then when you listen to these different sides, you're like, oh, well, maybe it's neither. Like, maybe it's not the best and maybe it's not the worst. Maybe life is just continuing on as it has. Like, I don't know. So I just recommend to, like, just, get to know what else is out there. And I do think, like, for the most part, I follow people that are like, they question the establishment, whether from the left or the right or the center or whatever else. But I do listen to some establishment folks too, because I want to know what the mainliners are thinking. And it just informs the way that I understand the world. And like I said, it actually makes me less nervous about the future. Stop giving the government unlimited amounts of power. Can't you see what they are doing to the world? Deplorabology. Stop giving the I'm not totally sure what the question is there for me to answer. But let's see. I don't want the government necessarily taking the place of big tech. So I do think that having, that was what I wanted to talk about actually, was this other article, because this is important. This was actually from, I think, 2019 in the New York Times. There's a long article the New York Times did, interview with Joe Biden, and they talk about 230 in it. And he basically says that he wants to revoke 230. So it says right here, talking about Zuckerberg, let's see, I've been in the view that not only should we be worrying about the concentration of power, we should be worried about the lack of privacy and them being exempt, which you're not exempt, talking about the Times. The Times can't write something to be false and be exempt from being sued, but he can, talking about Zuckerberg. The idea that it's a tech company is that Section 230 should be revoked, immediately should be revoked, number one, for Zuckerberg and other platforms. And then they say that's a pretty foundational law, that for the modern internet. And he says, that's right, exactly right. And it should be revoked. It should be revoked because it is not merely an internet company. It is propagating falsehoods they know to be false. And we should be setting standards, not unlike the Europeans are doing relative to privacy. You guys still have editors. I'm sitting with them, not a joke. There is no editorial impact at all on Facebook. None whatsoever. It's irresponsible. It's totally irresponsible. So talking about Section 230, revoking Section 230. Is that really going to happen? I don't know. But again, that's where the freedom for these platforms come. And if they're going to lose them and they could be sued, I think you're going to see more censorship, not less. And I think that's going to end up becoming more of a problem. And I also think, like, you do hear this argument a lot of times from the left saying, like, we need more censorship because of fake news. And again, it's like, but don't you see how that just pendulum swings back around towards other people late? Like, if you start cracking down on it in one case, it just becomes, like, to me, it becomes a mouthpiece of the powerful. And so again, I've said this before, I would prefer there to be, like, lots of bonkers information out there with the preservation of some very good necessary information not getting wiped because it questions the establishment. Like, I'm always going to fall on the risk is greater to censor than the opposite. Let's see here. I am going to go back. Bob, thank you for the super chat. Okay, I really appreciate it. That was very generous. Thank you so much. Okay, Torque One. Anyone that says stuff like that are extremists that should be ignored. Loudmouth should be ignored. Okay. Not totally sure if that, are you talking about people who are asking for censorship? Maybe. I think that, again, I've said this a million times and I'll probably just hang it up on this live stream and not say it again. But I do think that the people who call for censorship, I'm not totally sure if they've totally thought through. And I kind of wonder too, like, if that will change at some point down the road. Like, is that a result of also of the Trump presidency, that people are asking for things that, maybe prior to him, like, wouldn't have been a talking point? I don't know. So many things have kind of gone off the rails in the media in the last few years. So I'm not totally sure if it's a direct result of that or if it's just going to continue in the future. Maybe it's just the growth of these social media platforms and their influence. I don't know. But I do think, again, like I've said, to me, I will never ask for somebody, even if they say the nastiest things about me, I will never ask for them to be removed from the internet. I will always support their right to, call me a crazy person or whatever they want to say. So yes, somebody was asking about, Nick was asking about the unity movement with Brett Weinstein. I have looked into that, and actually maybe I'll do a video about it, but not a ton. And I do think, it's been interesting to me how that was handled too, because if I remember correctly, there wasn't a whole lot of attention. Like there were actually a conference with the progressive left as well, too, that like didn't make it into the media. And so when it comes to the elections and that kind of stuff, and it is interesting to me to see like people say, yeah, but like Tulsi, for instance, was a great example. Like, do candidates like Tulsi, did they lose or not get as much momentum because the media just chooses not to cover them, or because they just weren't popular? I mean, do you see the sort of like chicken or the egg argument here? Because like, or Andrew Yang, or, the outsiders, like in the Democratic primary, did they just not get the attention because the establishment decided they didn't deserve the attention? And so because you would often hear them say, well, they're just not getting the numbers, or we're just not covering them. They're just not getting the numbers. Well, are they not getting the numbers because you're not covering them? Because like another thing we could talk about is the Trump empty podium issue, like the video of Trump's empty podium and like the amount of the millions, if not billions of dollars of free advertising that Trump got before he was elected in 2016, and the criticisms of mainstream media for like essentially helping the guy get elected, but then hating him afterwards. That whole phenomenon was fascinating to me as well. And so, yeah, I mean, they often complain like, well, look at social media, it's influencing elections. But what about mainstream media? And like, no one would want like the government to come in and crack down on mainstream media when it comes to like, or I don't want to say no one, I mean the journalists themselves who are calling for censorship on these big tech platforms. They would never want themselves to be the recipient of that, that kind of action. So it's curious to me, because I'm going to make the argument that they have, just as much of an influence on public discourse. Let's see here. How about tech loses Section 230 protections if it moderates constitutionally protected speech in any way? Well, one thing that, the DOJ I read was looking into was changing that term in Section 230, like objectionable material, or they were gonna qualify what that meant, I think, or they were gonna add that or something. I can't remember what the wording was that they were gonna try to change, but there's something that they said, okay, like in that terminology, like should you be more clear about what that term objectionable content means, because that's where a lot of this stuff gets kind of nuanced and censored, because like you have these community guidelines. For instance, YouTube has community guidelines where it determines sort of subjectively what is objectionable and not, what is hate, what is dangerous, like all that stuff. And I've had videos that are, it's bizarre, like what is considered objectionable versus another one, or harmful or whatnot. So I think that was something that the DOJ was considering with this task force that Trump put together. What happens in the future, like with this, I don't know. But again, I just like put it on the record that, I think like totally revoking Section 230, like the arguments I've read against that seem to be valid, that like you could end up making things a heck of a lot worse. And like there are a lot of great parts. I mean, I'm on YouTube right now connecting with you guys despite all of the issues. And so there are a lot of great parts to the internet, and the internet has, given us the opportunity to question the sort of mainstream establishment, and that includes corporate media. And so I think it's, it's a very important conversation to have, but I'd be very hesitant to just kind of throw the hammer down. And it's worth reading more into if you all are interested in that topic. Definitely do your research, because it's something that doesn't necessarily get as much attention as it should, that Section 230 part of it. I mean, people I think know about, big tech censorship and whatnot, that talking point, but I don't think are as educated on Section 230. And so if you are interested in it, it's worth reading into. It's definitely like definitely going to be something that influences the way that we communicate with each other and the way our world is constructed in years to come. So it's worth knowing. Let's see here. Okay. Mainstream media turns everything into a popularity contest. That's why Tulsi lost. Biden was made popular by mainstream media because they wanted him. Twerk won. Well, you know, like I said, like the data is pretty clear on how much free advertising Trump got prior to getting elected. And there's been a lot of research done about like whether that, you know, that popularity, you know, I've actually read opinion articles about that phenomenon saying basically that he got all this free advertising, he got elected, and then it was like, well, now what do we do with him? Because we don't like this guy. And so then it was just like, but we need him because we need to talk about him because he's so good for the ratings. And that's when it flipped to being like, well, we'll just bash him all the time then. Because he was really good for ratings before the election, but now we're kind of thinking maybe like the New York Times, like he's like a, you know, he's a threat to our objectivity as journalists. And so, but we still don't want to stop covering him and stop giving him attention because he's really good for the ratings. So we'll just do the opposite and we'll just, you know, we'll do all these negative articles about him. So there's plenty of there are plenty of articles written about the media coverage like that and how all that went down, and how, you know, the media and let's to think about like even within the Democratic Party, for instance, not just like Trump versus Hillary, but like Bernie versus Hillary. I mean, like think about that and like Donna Brazile and, you know, and how that went down. And now Donna's a commentator on Fox, you know, like she's basically admitted, I believe, if I'm remembering it correctly, that the, you know, questions were given to the Hillary campaign before the debates. And so you'll hear a lot of, you know, people on the progressive left feel like Bernie, you know, got the short end of the stick on all of that. But then what happened to her, Donna? She's a commentator on Fox now. So, you know, like, and the sort of NSA guys or CIA people who have been part of illegal programs with the U.S. government, like under past administration, the Obama administration, are commentators on CNN. So I've said before, it just like, but Ed Snowden, he can't come back to the United States. He's stuck in Russia. So I don't know. It's really interesting how all that shakes out. Again, it's why I make the argument in the past that a lot of this is like, it's a class thing in some cases more than it is even a political thing. Everybody's sort of, you know, of the same ilk and the same establishment way of thinking, and it has a lot less to do with right and left. All right. Well, guys, I don't know. I'm going to try to go through some of these comments because there's a lot of them. I really do appreciate everybody. I would love to see Allison talk with Viva Frey about topics like censorship. I did actually just see him post something on his account about he had another video that was demonetized or maybe I don't even removed or something. But basically the response was you're treading in murky waters because if you've had enough of these where you've said you should be able to earn monetization, you should be able to earn money on your video, and we found it to be objectionable, then you could have your entire channel taken away forever. I believe that was like essentially the content of that email that he shared from a team at YouTube. And, you know, if you don't know Viva Frey's channel, he's an attorney in Canada who does a lot of like legal breakdowns. And so it was really odd to see that like he's been considered so objectionable by YouTube that he could potentially lose. Like that does not bode well because I don't think that guy says a whole lot of that. I mean, yeah, I mean, he may have like certain bias in some of his videos, but I don't see him saying anything that's like, you know, that's just so like harmful or dangerous. I think I can't remember what the word was that YouTube used. It was something like that, was harmful or, you know, content and like what is a lawyer breaking down legal cases harmful? It's weird, but like that's the danger of being on a platform like YouTube. And obviously I'm on YouTube while I'm complaining about it. Like I've started looking into other platforms just to diversify the same way you diversify your economic portfolio, for instance. But, you know, for now it's got the reach. And so like I'm on it. Hopefully, like, I don't know, maybe something good comes out of it and we have a better version of it someday, even if we have to hit a wall in the meantime. But yeah, I have seen his stuff and I think it's interesting what he's had to say. Let's see here. Amazing how quickly Allison talks, clearly. Not as fast as Candace Owens, still quite amazing. Yeah, I'm used to talking fast because I had like 90 seconds to say everything I needed to say back when I was in TV. So let's see here. Well, I don't know, guys. Yeah, be safe during these uncertain times. Please consider not looking at this controversial material. I don't know what that is, but I do appreciate all the comments. I am very grateful to have all of you guys, even if you don't like what I'm saying. I do try to read the comments. It helps when the feedback is constructive, like an idea versus just I hate your guts. But you know what? If you hate my guts, that's okay too. You can say that. I will not call for censoring you. Anyway, I think I'm gonna hit the road, guys. Let's see. Thank you for putting this out. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, one more. It's about money always. The difference is some sell out principles and morals, others don't. Twerk one. Well, yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for the fact that everybody's running a business, right? We all have to feed our families. Now, I will say some of us make choices so that we don't have to make that much money. And that's a choice that we made. We left the city because, like, we looked at the fact that Seattle is a very expensive place to live. And if I lived in Seattle, I had to have a 6-figure salary. If I had to have a 6-figure salary, I had to do things a certain way, required by my 6-figure salary. And so there was, like, my choice was to, you know, quit and stay and, like, be, you know, unable to make rent payments, or figure out how to simplify my life. And, you know, my husband and I had the conversation about my leaving that corporate news world and what would work for us. And so we realized that if we could just bring down our expenses then and just live more simply. And that's why I'm able to do this too, because I can do YouTube from wherever. Well, we've had some issues with Wi-Fi, obviously, because when you live in a rural place, the Wi-Fi is not always that great, but it does give me the opportunity to kind of say whatever I want and talk about issues as I see them. And I don't need a 6-figure salary anymore because the ranchers and farmers I buy my food from, they live down the road. I literally meet them off the side of the highway. We have a well. We can have our horses right on the property. I don't have to pay somebody to take care of my horse because she can live right here. And so that's brought down our expenses a lot. So I think sometimes, like, when we complain about, like, the cities and the problems there, like, well, you know, vote with your dollar and consider changing your lifestyle and moving to a place where it's more simple and where you can have more freedom to, you know, live your life responsibly the way you see it. Let's see. Everyone watching should go give it a like. Thanks, Bob. I think you're wrong about lots of stuff, but totally honest and sincere, which makes you a keeper. Stay awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Hey, let me know what you think I'm wrong about too, though, so that I can comment on it. Let's see. Venison is tasty. Yes, it is. Community potatoes. Tim should just start doing the book. Let's see. What else? TV. Okay. Mark, super chat. Thank you. I honestly believe with the evidence the Trump team has collected along with SCOTUS assignments to key states, President Trump might win. I don't know. I honestly, I'm waiting to see what happens with this. I think either way, it's going to be fascinating to see what comes out of this, not just politically, but how it's covered by the media, what happens with the social media companies, you know, and information regarding this. Actually, you know, some people are like, oh God, like, this is a scary time to be alive. I actually am, like, really excited to be alive right now because I think it's just fascinating. If you're not, like, emotionally attached to the hysteria that is often, like, spouted, I try to, like, disengage from social media certain amounts of time during the day and just, like, go outside and get some sun or whatever. And if you're not, like, hysterical and obsessive about the headlines, in some cases, like, I don't know if you guys know Tim Dillon, the comedian. I listen to him quite a bit. That guy, like, he just laughs about the craziest things. And I think sometimes you just, you know, you got to just throw back a cold one and chill out. Let's see here. Anything else? What do you think about Tim Pool? I watch Tim Pool's stuff. He's one of the people that I get information from. I watch him. I watch Kyle Kulinski. I watch Jimmy Dore. I watch Ben Shapiro. I watch Glenn, you know, I see Glenn Greenwald on a lot of, he's writes a lot of stuff, but I read a lot of his stuff. Oh gosh, who else? I watch a lot of David Pakman. He's on the left. I watch a lot of different kinds of people. And so as far as Tim is concerned, you know, I know he used to work for Vice. And he's, you know, kind of like does the headline commentary thing. And, you know, I think that guy has been really successful. I don't know. I've seen some people criticize him. I don't know if it's fair or not about, like, you know, just kind of ramping up the temperature sometimes with things. And, you know, that's kind of his style, I think, sometimes. But I do think that Tim has given some voice to some fair criticism of big tech that wasn't there before, and some criticisms of mainstream media that wasn't necessarily getting enough attention. So I've appreciated some of the stuff that I've learned from Tim, and you got to give it to the guy. He's grown a huge channel off of just kind of being someone who is willing to call BS on corporate news. So let's see. I hate needles. I don't know. Are we talking about drugs? What are we talking about here? I don't know. Allison, you were one of my favorites. Love you. Thank you. TV, what is it? Okay. Let's see. Super chat. Over the air broadcast made BC, Washington great neighbors. Will digital change this? I don't know. So do you live in Washington or British Columbia? Because I live in Washington. We love going up there. Let's see. Will you get the vaccine, Allison? It will amuse me. I'm going to be waiting to see what happens with this vaccine. I'm just going to leave it at that. Let's see here. Tim Dillon does a few interviews with Whitney Webb. I recommend checking them out if you haven't. Yes, I've seen a couple of those. Parlay, Rumble are far left. I don't know. I don't know enough about the platforms to comment on that. I have a lot more respect for Glenn Greenwald after his stand concerning the suppression of the Hunter Biden material. Yeah, I mean, that just confirmed to me, I guess, that Glenn was willing to go out there and take a risk for what he believed to be an important story. And that takes a lot of courage in today's world, especially like he has a family, and I actually know he started a dog rescue recently. So I think, like, unfortunately, like, well, first off, Glenn deserved a lot of credit long before that, because Glenn broke one of the biggest stories of like the last, couple decades with the Ed Snowden stuff. And I think, unfortunately, like, a lot of the journalists who complain on Twitter about stuff, or even the ones who are calling for censorship, I wonder if I'm not even going to wonder, I'm going to just call it, like, they probably have not done stories of that nature, where you could have the CIA, or some government agency basically lock you up and throw away the key for your reporting. And let's talk about Assange someday, right? I'm working on getting a journalist who's been covering the Assange trial come on the channel and talk about it. But that's a whole other story. And what happens with that case, what will happen to journalists who like aren't even really covering that case right now. But that could have very long-lasting consequences for journalism as we know it. But Glenn, he has done stories at the risk of his life and his freedom. And so anybody who is willing to take on those topics, I think deserves the respect of other journalists. I'm fascinated to see people come down on him. I've said before that it's odd to me when a journalist who was looked at with so much respect for so long, when they question something that everybody else is talking about, that all of a sudden, like overnight, they turn into somebody who can't sort through their own political bias or has agenda or whatever. It's like, well, how is he such a good journal? Like, how did he do stuff before that you were approved of, and then like overnight he turned into somebody you don't trust? I've never quite understood that, especially like with the doctors with COVID, for instance, like certain doctors who have been whistleblowers at their hospitals about stuff, like they were looked at as good doctors, great healers for many, many, many years. And then all of a sudden they broke away from the established ideas about treating COVID, for instance, and they were shut down. I think that's interesting. Like, well, what was it? I mean, did they have the ability to treat before, or do they not have the ability to treat now? Like, well, what's going on there? And so be aware of that. I mean, I think that's something like I could impart as knowledge from a journalism standpoint, is just be aware of when you see that, like somebody who was in the inner circles, and then all of a sudden is like, that person's crazy by, the inner circle then calls them nuts. It's like, well, are they really nuts? I mean, you guys trusted this person for so long, and then all of a sudden they're questioning what you're doing, and now they're crazy. I think that to me is a warning sign. Let's see. Be well. Thank you. They are going to force people to get the vaccine here. That is a fact. Why do you think Trump keeps talking about how the military is involved in distributing? I don't know, but if that happens, I will definitely do a video about it. I can assure you. John Stossel is my fave now. I think he's looking for someone to take the mantle. I like John a lot too. John was a reporter in Portland before he went national, and I was a reporter in Seattle. He was a consumer reporter. I was an environmental reporter. We actually have a lot of very similar, a lot of similarities in our backgrounds, and I've really enjoyed hearing his commentary on the media because we see some of the same things. Let's see. Define a journalist. That's a great question. I think there are a lot of people who probably call themselves journalists who don't necessarily deserve that title, and people who are just like out there on a cell phone and probably deserve it even more. Let's see. Doubt people will. Most people are too fat, lazy, and complacent. Let's see. Thought everyone had seen Collateral Murder. It's what Assange posted of Apache helicopter gunning down 25 people, including kids. See you later, alligator. Good point on Glenn Greenwald and Ed Snowden. I guess you're saying with Hunter Biden, Greenwald stepped over the boundaries of political activism that absolutely rules so-called journalism today. Let's see. Thoughts on Gavin Newsom getting caught at French Laundry and mainstream media silence on it. Okay, I'm glad somebody asked about this, Mark. Thank you. You know, I think there are two things to debate here. One is not just like whether you want to talk about the hypocrisy of the politicians, like, you know, the Pelosi hairdressing scandal, or like when that was making the rounds, or Gavin Newsom going to that party. Or did you see the article about the lobbyists and the government officials going to this luxury resort in Hawaii? Did you see that article? And talking about, I think, to talk about like businesses reopening under COVID. What actually I picked up on all of these was how many times the word exclusive or luxury was used in these articles. And now, granted, is that honest? I don't know these restaurants. I don't know these hotels. But why are all these government officials going to luxury and exclusive resorts and dinners? Like, can somebody explain that to me? I mean, that's one question I have. Not just like the, you know, that they're breaking their own rules, but like, why do we keep seeing the word luxury and exclusive in the details of where they're hanging out? Like that, because I can't afford to go to those places. Okay, Flynn, thank you. Please keep up the good work. I appreciate it. Lockdown, let's see, did not work. I'm constantly surprised and impressed with the new trend that YouTubers and other vloggers and stuff actually take the time and effort to listen to their audience. I do. Let's see. She's honest because she doesn't have a boss or media conglomerate to tell her otherwise. I don't know if you're talking about me. I want to say this. I was always honest when I was in media, like when I was in mainstream media. I didn't have a boss that came down and said like, you will say this. I think a lot of people think that you work for corporate news. And again, like I said, like, is that happening at some outlets? Potentially. But it's not what happened with me. And it's not necessarily always what I saw, or ever really what I saw in my world of local news. It was more of an echo chamber. That was the problem. The problem was both sort of just an ideological echo chamber of people who come from the same backgrounds and kind of think the same way, and people who may otherwise think differently, but are maybe scared, maybe don't have time to check their bias, don't have time to do the research that they need to do. Stories that you can do in 4 hours, you know, and I don't mean like tell in 4 hours of talking. I mean, you have 4 hours to get to the bottom of them. Those stories often are the ones that make it on the news, right? Because that's how much time you have. And that means that important issues are not making it in the news because like the producers and the journalists, some of whom have very good intentions, realize that if they went after those topics, like it would be terrible journalism. And so they just don't do them. And actually, that was one of the reasons that I decided to get out, because that more than anything, I was sitting back and I'd come home and I'd talk to my husband and say, like, if you could prove to me that all of the stress, all of the just worrying and the just racing to the end of the day every day and equipment breaking and having, because, you know, I shot and edited all my own stuff. I drove the car. I didn't work with a photographer. I did it all myself for the most part. There were some, like I did a bear investigation, which I'm going to update sometime on the channel with an amazing photojournalist named Andy Wallace. And that was great. You know, those times when I got to work with folks of his, you know, ilk, of his professional ability was like amazing. But the majority of the time I did everything by myself. So I'm not just like researching and writing and stuff. I'm like editing, I'm driving the car, shooting the video. Like imagine shooting the video while you're doing the interview. You're like, like trying to make sure you're still in frame. You know, and it's like, did you just say something crazy? I don't know. I'm not really paying attention because I'm paying attention to the camera and making sure that you're frame right. So they're like all these problems. Again, I said this at the beginning of the live stream, like that journalists deal with it. They'll talk about behind the scenes, but I think maybe they don't talk about it as often in front of people because they don't necessarily want to call into question, you know, the authority of the business. Let's see. Anything else we need to talk about here? Let's see. can we get out of this single narrative journalistic style? How do we get more open-minded news out in front of the people? Is it too late? I never say it's too late on anything. How do you get it out there? I think people have to support the real journalists that are trying to do good work and make sure that, like, if you are in a local news market and you have a journalist that you appreciate and you saw a story that you really liked, write their boss and let them know and say, hey, give this person more time to do this kind of work. We really want to see that, because the bosses are going to make the choices based on ratings, and that brings in money. So they're not going to put a lot of losing material on. So if you tell them it's popular and you consume it and you share it, same thing I say on my channel, share this video, like on this video, comment on the video. I mean, if you do that with your news and you let people know what you think, then I think you might be able to change things on a local news level. I'm not totally sure at like MSNBC or Fox News, but definitely. But actually, Fox is an interesting thing, and that's going to be interesting to see going forward, because a lot of people have turned on Fox after their coverage of the election. Are they going to change the way they do things? I don't know. But I will say you probably have more power to affect your local news environment than a corporate, national network. Let's see. Sounds like you work community television, appear in honest form. Your critic is in the line behind you as an incentive. Yes, that's a great point. You see your community out in the street, and so you don't want to burn them by telling lies about people, because you're going to run into them at the movie theater if the movie theaters ever open up again. Let's see, Allison, how can they support good journalists when they A, don't know they exist, are comfortable with their current bias source, or C, don't know about their bias and don't need to look for? You're talking about how the person doesn't know their bias and don't need to look for it, or the journalist doesn't? I mean, if you're a consumer of news and you aren't taking the initiative to be a better consumer of news, there's not really much I can do for you. I think with everything, you have to take responsibility for what you put in your body, and that includes your mind, what you're consuming for education, and what you're eating. I mean, I've been a firm advocate of, like, I buy from ranchers who's a lot of times I've been to their farms. I like to see how the animals are raised and what they're fed, and that's important to me. And I don't just hand that over to like Amazon or the grocery store. I take extra time in my life to get to know people who are feeding my family, and I think that's important. And it's really been actually very valuable, I think, just like to have those relationships in general. It's given me food for thought as we've seen these shutdowns, what's been happening to folks like that. Same thing with media. You got to get to know the source, and you have to take some actual time to take responsibility for your actions. And, as far as the journalists are concerned, they have to do the same thing. Unfortunately, too many journalists are blaming the public for the role that they're in, and, the defensiveness they feel like they have to continue voicing. And I don't think they actually need to be that defensive. I think we should just take responsibility for the times that we've messed up and move on and do better. But yeah, I mean, journalists need to take responsibility too, and change their behavior where it needs to be, and not to go into like thinking they need to be perfect, but just take responsibility for where we mess up and be honest about it and move on. Let's see here. I think we're farm to table check. Yes. Let's see. Anything else we need to talk about? It's not like corpo media just spent 5 years spreading anti-healthcare propaganda or anything. Do you expect YouTube to start coming after channels like yours at some point? Probably. They already have demonetized my videos randomly. I don't know. I don't know if I'm that controversial. Maybe I will be someday. I'm not totally sure, but yeah, they might come after me for talking about stuff. They've demonetized my videos, like, so I've faced that. I haven't had anything totally pulled off the platform, but I have had stuff demonetized as being harmful. And that actually was my video about the protests about the lockdowns. I did a video, an interview with somebody that I know who was a friend of mine who was participating in the California protests way back several months ago on the, the business closures in California due to COVID. And he was just talking about the protests, like why they were out there and stuff. And YouTube flagged that as harmful content. But they did not flag my video as harmful about the Chaz Chop, if you remember that, which was interesting, which was a protest just like that, but actually people died there. So I don't know. Yes, they shadow banned my Antifa video. Well, I don't know what happened to my Antifa video. I don't know what happened to my Antifa video. Honestly, all I know is that we got a great run for 1 week, and I was getting like 250,000 views a day and like, I don't know, 10,000 subscribers a day, something ridiculous like that. And then just Sunday night, poof, just nothing. You can't find it. I haven't tried recently, but if you guys Google the exact title for a long time, like I'd Google the exact title. A lot of people would Google the exact title, and it wouldn't come up in search results unless you used Bing and DuckDuckGo. But if you use Google, it was not even anywhere near the top. I mean, I went 5 pages, I still couldn't find it. If I have to leave YouTube, where will I go? I don't know. Where will I go? Some island somewhere in the middle of nowhere and just drink coconuts, I guess, for the rest of my life. I don't know. I think that I probably am going to get my website going more for this so that I'll have a website. Because I do have a website for my media company, but I don't have a website for like my news analysis to post these videos on. So that's the next step, I think, for me, is to just have my own website. But, you know, the other difficult thing, too, is trying to figure out, like, if you're somebody who's using PayPal or Patreon like I do. I mean, we've seen even banks. It's interesting. Like, I was going to do a video about the sort of criminal activity, you know, the investigation into some of these big banks. And they're like kind of turning the blind eye to criminal activity or, you know, using their banks to transfer money and whatnot. But then they come after like small creators on these platforms and won't let them use their, you know, banking system to get money from subscribers. But like cartels are using, you know, and are using their banking and like, you know, like high level criminals to do work, but like you can't have somebody transfer you $25 on, you know, Citibank or something like that. It's really interesting how that works out. But I do think I need to get my website going for this, and then I will give you guys an update on that. Let's see, Rumble, Bing, 4chan. Oh God. Let's see, DuckDuckGo. Yeah, I mean, if you go DuckDuckGo, you'll find my Antifa video, that's for sure. All right. Everyone's saying Rumble. I make websites. I can at least help to offer a consultation on how to not be targeted for accepting payments and stuff. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Any thoughts about Quillette? Wanted to hear what a journalist thinks. I do every once in a while read their stuff. They've got some interesting articles on there. I think, you know, it's been interesting to see some of the criticism of people that write for Quillette. I think they're pretty open about what they're doing. So I don't know. I think it's just part of like, if you are, you know, reading some of their stuff and then others of like kind of different variations, then great. Like you're getting different perspectives. I've said a million times, like, you can ignore ideas that are out there, but they don't go away. Like, just because you're going like, like, I don't want to, you know, just pretending like that ideas don't go away. So like, I consume like some ideas that I find to be horrendous and terrible. Like, I read them and listen to people who say them, because I want to know what people are listening to. Like, I want to know what's out there. I don't think ideas go away because I ignore them. A real journalist does not think that way. I should say that. And like, whether you're a real journalist in the sense of like, you're a, you know, like me, I'm a mom with a 6-month-old and I got a cell phone or whatever, or you're somebody who's on YouTube, or you're somebody who works for a major corporate news outlet, like somebody who's got a real journalist mindset does not just ignore an idea and think it goes away. They explore them and critique them, and debunk them if they're bad, or share them, you know, and show their positive qualities if they're good, or whatever. Like, whatever you find, you just share what you find. You don't just delete the content. You don't just ignore it. I guess that's the way I look at it. Okay. Guys, my voice is starting to hurt. I think it's time to go. I'm going to go, we're going to go lunge the crazy horse that we have. Thanks. Am I saying Fady? Is that right? Thank you for the super chat. And yeah, we just really appreciate y'all, my family and I do. Lynn, YouTube is the second most used search engine we're used right after Google. Yeah, and they're basically the same thing. So if you can't find me on YouTube or Google, that's pretty bad. But anyway, like I said, I'm gonna eventually get my own stuff going, and I will be on other platforms eventually. It's tough, y'all. I mean, I wanted to start this live stream at 10 a.m. and we didn't start till 12:30 because we have nap time, we have feeding the baby, we have a baby who cries, you know, we have a horse as a dog, we're cleaning out, like we just, you know, we're trying to like run a broadcast center and also like a home, and I am a mom, and I take my role as a mom as the most serious job that I have, and so my child's always going to come first, because I don't want to raise a crazy person. You know what I mean? I want her to be like, oh, my mom paid attention to me. She wasn't just on YouTube all the time while I was, you know, hanging out in my crib by myself. Let's see. Surf your subscribers' channels and see what they're interested in. Yeah, that's a good idea. Sounds like 3 to 5 babies. What? Oh, yeah, I have a lot. Well, I do have 2 horses. I have a husband. No, he's pretty mature. Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, thanks again. And have a video coming up on a few extra things this week. If you have any ideas, like my video today on this Deadspin video, that came from people who just emailed me. So shoot me an email or a comment and a message or whatever. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I like looking at what people are interested in. I try to comment on them as I can. Again, I do the best I can with video. I'm hoping to get to daily uploads at some point. But you know, it'll come as I grow this channel, and the more people who support me help me make this a full-time thing. And so that's awesome. So I'm just going to scroll back and make sure I didn't miss anything here on super chats. Thank you guys for the super chats. I think we're good. Okay, guys, I'm just gonna make sure. Yeah, you can email me ideas. To everyone, make sure your friends, family, and close ones are doing okay. Absolutely. That's a pretty good way to end it, because I think there are a lot of people who are having a tough time right now. And I think people are maybe because like the virus and the election and just everything is so hypercharged and politicized at this point that maybe folks don't feel comfortable sharing like what is really bothering them right now. It's easy for us to get all worked up about kind of these like macro issues, which are important to discuss. But like if you can't afford to buy your groceries, or you're feeling like, you know, you're depressed because of what's going on, and you know, you need a friend or whatever, I encourage people, like sometimes it's hard to reach out for help. So, you know, ask your loved ones. We have a neighbor, she's older. When we were in DC last week, I knew from talking to her that she had never gotten a chance her whole life, even though I think she's in her late 70s or early 80s. She never gotten to go to DC. So I sent her pictures of us in DC and just asked her how she was doing. And, you know, I like living in a place where neighbors still take care of each other. And so, yeah, I mean, even if you're in a city, like just ask somebody if they need some help. But sometimes it's hard to ask for it. So to have somebody else ask you is cool. Okay. And thank you. You donated through PayPal. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. That's it. I'll see you on the next video. I got to figure out how to end this thing. I think I just press a button here, but if I'm still up, did I stop stream? Okay. See you next time.